Imagine standing on a stage in front of the most powerful people in Hollywood, clutching a gold statue that weighs more than my first camera, while millions of people around the world wonder who the hell I am. Just 12 months ago, I was editing videos in my mother's basement, eating cold ramen, and praying that my latest upload would hit 1,000 views, so I could finally afford a new microphone. Now, I'm looking at an A-list actor in the front row who is visibly weeping because of a story I told with a cracked screen and a borrowed laptop. My life changed in a way that shouldn't be possible. And it all started with a mistake that almost landed me in prison. Before I tell you how a nobody, with 300 subscribers ended up at the Academy Awards, I have to ask you, if you had the chance to expose a massive lie that would ruin a billionaire but make you famous, would you pull the trigger, or would you stay silent to save yourself? Tell me honestly, because I'm still not sure if I'm a hero or a thief. It all began on a Tuesday in March. My name is Leo, and at 24, I was the definition of a struggling creator. I ran a tiny channel where I did deep dive video essays on forgotten cinema. I loved movies more than anything, but I was failing. My rent was overdue. My girlfriend had just left me because she said I was chasing a pipe dream. And I was down to my last $40. I decided to make one final video before giving up and looking for a retail job. I wanted to do a piece on an old abandoned film studio in the desert that had burned down in the 90s. I drove my beat-up sedan out there, snuck past a rusted chain-link fence, and started filming. While I was exploring the charred remains of an old storage vault, I tripped over a loose floorboard. Underneath it wasn't gold or money, but a weather-beaten, sealed metal canister labeled with a date from 1994. I thought it was just old B-roll, but when I got home and spent 3 days painstakingly cleaning and digitizing the film, I realized I was holding something that shouldn't exist. It was 20 minutes of raw footage featuring a legendary director who had passed away years ago, but the footage wasn't from any of his known films. It was a masterpiece. A short, silent sequence of an elderly woman looking at the sea that felt more human than anything I had ever seen in a theater. I spent weeks staring at that footage in my dark room, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my eyes. I felt like I had discovered a lost gospel. The way the light hit the actress's face, the grain of the 35mm film, it was haunting. Every time I hit play, I felt like I was trespassing on a ghost's private memory. I began researching the studio, a place called Zenith Pictures that went bankrupt after a suspicious fire in the mid-90s. The more I dug, the more I realized this footage was never meant to be seen. It was part of a project called The Last Horizon, which was rumored to be the director's final masterpiece before he died in a car accident. The studio had claimed the entire negative was destroyed in the fire to collect a massive insurance payout. If I came forward with this, I wasn't just showing a film. I was proving insurance fraud on a massive scale. I knew I couldn't just upload it. It wasn't mine. But I was desperate, and more than that, I was inspired. I decided to use that footage as the foundation for a short film of my own. I spent 6 months filming around it, weaving a modern story of grief and memory that connected to those haunting images from 1994. To make my parts match the vibe of the lost footage, I had to get creative. I didn't have a crew or a budget, so I spent my nights scouting locations that looked timeless. I found an old pier that was falling apart, and convinced a local fisherman to let me film there for the price of a 6-pack. I used my mother's old curtains to soften the light, and spent hundreds of hours in color grading software, trying to match the digital grain to that chemical 1994 look. I went to thrift stores to find the exact same type of wool coat the woman in the original footage wore. So my modern-day actress, my sister, who I practically begged to help, could look like a younger version of her. There were nights I didn't sleep at all. My eyes were bloodshot, and I was surviving on caffeine and sheer adrenaline. I felt like a mad scientist stitching together a monster, but the monster was beautiful. I called it the echo of the tide. I poured every ounce of my soul into it. I used cheap LED lights, my friends acted for free, and I edited it on a computer that crashed every 20 minutes. I remember one specific night where the power went out during a thunderstorm, and I lost 4 hours of work. I sat in the dark and cried, thinking the universe was telling me to stop. But I didn't. I stayed up until sunrise redoing every single cut. My life started to fall apart in other ways. I was ignoring calls from debt collectors, and my landlord was taping "Notice to Vacate" signs on my door. I was literally a week away from being homeless, but I couldn't stop editing. I felt like the director from 1994 was reaching through time, guiding my hands. When I finished, I didn't just upload it to YouTube on a whim. And because I had nothing left to lose, I entered it into a small, obscure film festival that had a digital-first category. I didn't think twice about it until I got an email 3 weeks later. The festival director told me my film was the most moving thing he'd seen in a decade. He wanted to push it to the next level. Suddenly, a major distributor picked it up for a limited theatrical run, just to qualify it for awards season. It was a long shot, 1 billion to 1 chance. But then the unthinkable happened. The big 3 critics loved it. They called it a bridge between generations. My subscriber count went from 300 to 500,000 in a month. But as the hype grew, so did my terror. I started getting invited to fancy parties where people asked me about my process. I had to lie through my teeth. They'd ask, "Leo, where did you find that actress for the ocean scene? Her performance is timeless." I'd just nod and say she was a local find who wanted to stay anonymous. Every time I lied, a piece of me felt like it was breaking. I was living a double life. By day, I was the wunderkind of independent cinema. And by night, I was a terrified kid scrolling through legal forums, wondering if I was going to end up in a federal penitentiary for copyright theft and trespassing. I would sit in these 5-star restaurants, staring at plates of food that cost more than my monthly rent used to be, feeling like a spy behind enemy lines. I started noticing people following me. Not fans, but men in gray suits. I realized Zenith Pictures, or whatever parent company had swallowed them up, was watching. They knew the anonymous footage was theirs. If people found out that the core of my film, the genius part, was found footage I didn't technically own, I'd be finished. The stress was eating me alive. I lost weight, I stopped answering my phone, and I became a hermit in my own success. Then the vultures started circling. The studio that owned the land, a massive conglomerate that had forgotten that Vault even existed, noticed the aesthetic of my film looked suspiciously like a project they had insured and written off as a total loss after the 1994 fire. They did a forensic analysis of the frames. They realized the truth. They didn't just want the footage back. They realized that if the world knew the footage survived, they would be investigated for the multi-million-dollar insurance claim they made 30 years ago. I wasn't just a filmmaker anymore. I was a witness to a crime they had buried decades ago. The morning the Oscar nominations were announced, I was sitting in my pajamas, trembling. When they said my name for Best Live-Action Short Film, I didn't cheer. I vomited. I was a fraud in the eyes of the law, but a visionary in the eyes of the world. Within 2 hours of the nomination, my front door was served with papers. The studio's lawyers were ruthless. They didn't just want the money. They wanted to humiliate me. They sent me a cease and desist, demanding I hand over the rights and the stolen footage. They wanted to bury me. They told me they would sue me for everything I had, and ensure I never worked in the industry again, unless I signed over all the credit to them. They wanted to claim their archives had produced the film, and that I was just a hired hand. They offered me a silence fee, a couple $100,000 to just go away and let them take the Oscar. For a kid who couldn't afford a microphone a year ago, that was a life-changing amount of money. But it felt dirty. They even threatened my sister, saying they'd sue her as an accomplice for appearing in a film made with stolen property. That was the breaking point. I sat in my mother's basement, the same place where it all started, looking at the metal canister. I realized that if I gave in, I'd be letting down every single person who had subscribed to me because they believed in the underdog story. I realized that these people didn't care about the art. They only cared about the silence. I spent 3 nights straight editing a new video. It wasn't a movie. It was a documentary of the last year. I recorded my phone calls with their lawyers. I filmed the notice to vacate signs. I filmed the dust on the floorboards where I found the canister. I decided to go public. I made a video titled The Truth, explaining exactly where the footage came from and how the studio had let it rot in the dirt for 30 years. I showed the rusted canister, the charred floorboards, and the receipts for the cleaning equipment I'd used. I even dropped the bombshell about the insurance fraud, showing the old newspaper clippings of the fire next to the perfectly preserved film I had found. The internet exploded. People rallied behind me. The small creator versus corporate giant narrative took over the news. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Stand with Leo was trending globally. So that's the situation I was in. I was heading to the biggest night in Hollywood with a lawsuit hanging over my head, and the entire industry divided on whether I was a genius or a criminal. I had the public on my side, but the elites wanted me gone. I was told by my own PR team that I shouldn't even show up to the ceremony, that it would be disrespectful to the Academy to attend while under active litigation. But I thought about that elderly woman in the footage, looking out at the sea, and I knew I had to be there for her. Before I tell you what happened when they opened that envelope and the aftermath of that night, I want you to pause right now. Go to the comments and tell me, if you found a lost piece of art that would change the world, would you share it even if it meant breaking the rules, or would you let it stay buried forever to avoid the trouble? I really want to know what you think about the ethics of what I did. The night of the Oscars was a blur of tuxedos and camera flashes. I felt like an alien. Every time I walked past a famous director, I felt like they could see right through my rented suit. The red carpet was a gauntlet of questions. Leo, are you worried about the lawsuit? Leo, is it true you're a thief? I just kept walking. When I finally sat down in the Dolby Theater, the air felt heavy. I was sitting just 5 seats away from the man who had sent the men in suits to my house. The category for short film came up, and my heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst through my shirt. The presenter opened the envelope, hesitated for a second, and then read my name. The room went silent for a beat. The YouTuber had actually won. As I walked up those steps, I saw the CEO of the studio that was suing me sitting in the 3rd row, looking livid. He was red-faced, whispering to his lawyer. I got to the mic and I didn't give a standard thank you speech. I didn't thank the Academy or my agent. I looked right at the camera and said, art doesn't belong to the people who buy the land. It belongs to the people who feel it. This footage was rotting in a hole, until a kid with a camera cared enough to save it. This is for everyone creating something out of nothing in their bedrooms. The crowd erupted. It was the viral moment of the century. My phone started vibrating in my pocket so much it felt like a buzzing insect. I had millions of notifications. Celebrities were standing up to cheer. It wasn't just a win for me. It was a middle finger to the system that tries to gatekeep creativity. The aftermath was chaotic. The studio eventually dropped the lawsuit because the public backlash was destroying their stock price. Their PR department realized that if they crushed me, they'd be the most hated company in the world. They were being ratioed on Twitter every single second. But it went deeper than that. The Department of Justice actually opened an investigation into the 1994 fire, and the insurance claim based on the evidence I presented in my YouTube video. The CEO who was glaring at me from the 3rd row? He resigned a month later. Instead of suing me, they tried to pivot. They offered me a multi-picture deal to consult on their archives, basically trying to buy my loyalty and keep me from testifying. I turned it down. I didn't want their money. I wanted my independence. I realized that the power I had didn't come from the gold statue. It came from the community of people who watched my journey from the basement. I used the momentum to start my own independent production house that focuses on finding and funding creators from platforms like YouTube and TikTok. We find the kids in basements and give them the resources the gatekeepers won't. I bought my mom a house, not in a basement, but on a hill with a view of the ocean that looks exactly like the one in the 1994 footage. My old girlfriend tried to call me a week after the win, crying and saying she always knew I'd make it, and that she only left to motivate me. I didn't pick up. I just blocked the number. Some bridges are meant to be burned. And some people only love you when you're under the spotlight. Today, I'm still the same guy who loves movies, but I don't have to worry about rent anymore. I have the gold man on my shelf to remind me that sometimes, the biggest risks lead to the most impossible rewards. I still go back to that desert sometimes, just to look at the fence I jumped. It reminds me where I came from. It reminds me that the most beautiful things in the world are often the ones that have been discarded and forgotten. The moral of my story is that your platform doesn't define your potential. Whether you have 10 followers or 10 million, the story you tell is what actually matters. Never let the gatekeepers tell you that you don't belong in the room, because sometimes, you're the one who's going to end up owning the room. You don't need $1 million budget to tell $1 billion story. You just need the courage to not look away when you find the truth. If you enjoyed this journey from the basement to the red carpet, please like this video. It really helps a small creator out. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about people beating the odds, and definitely share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I deserve that Oscar, or was I just a lucky thief? Was I wrong to use the footage, or was the studio wrong for letting it rot? I'll see you all in the next story.